Good evening, everyone. Welcome. As
Wow.
as we're all trickling in, welcome to tonight's learning. For those of you who are guests, I'm Cantor David Mintz, Director of the Center for Prayer and Spirituality at BJ, and welcome for tonight's the third installment of Torah for Our Time, which is a six-part series taught by alumni of the Marshall T. Meyer Rabbinic Fellowship. Bringing the wisdom of our tradition to some of the deepest themes of our time. And tonight it's my privilege to welcome back Rabbi Yael Ridberg, who was BJ's first ever Marshall T. Meyer Rabbinic Fellow from 1996 to 1998, before she then became the rabbi for West End Synagogue here in New York. She's since served as the rabbi of Congregation Dor Chadash in San Diego since 2010. And is the past president of San Diego Jewish Academy Board of Trustees, and is also a past president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. She's a sought-after teacher and speaker, and her writings have appeared in the Times of Israel, in Kveller, and the Huffington Post. Rabbi Ridberg lives in La Jolla, California, with her husband and 4 children, and it is our privilege to learn from and with her tonight. Rabbi Yael Ridberg. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh my God, my life is flashing before my eyes. You have all not changed one bit, not any of you. It's like yesterday. And so I'm so happy to have this opportunity. And there's so many of you, but I'm so happy to get a chance to see you after all this time, and to get a chance to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart. And because Rabbi Roli is here, and I want to, just say a word before he takes off. So many long time ago, right? The first year of the fellowship. I don't know if you guys remember, but Roli and Marcelo used to have these spontaneous, what appeared to be spontaneous, dialogues with each other in the middle of the Torah service. And the very, very first Dvar Torah I gave was on Parashat Lech Lecha. And I was not prepared for Roli to, in a moment of, vulnerability, as it were, say, so I have a question for you, and he asked me something about what I said, which was about the candle generation in Israel after Rabin's assassination. And I was like a deer in the headlights. And I was 5 minutes old doing rabbinic work. And I was in front of all of you. This was like November of 1996.
I was 6 minutes old.
You were, no, at least 10. At least 10. And by the way, you acted as if you were 20. So but vulnerability leads to all kinds of courage and hopefully integrity. And so that moment is a blessing in my own memory, because it gave me the kind of strength and stature in my small body that I needed to continue to stand at that bima amidst my teachers and really the giants of your community. So I'm really just honored to be back in this way and to see all of you, and to thank you again, Roli, for this opportunity and for the fellowship. It is really a blessing in my heart, for sure. So welcome all. This is a big topic that I don't know if we'll fit into 90 minutes, but we'll try, okay? It is 90 minutes, Dave, right? Like it is, right? 90, an hour?
85.
85, okay, I can do 85. That's not a problem. And I'm gonna share with you a source page on screen. But I wonder, before we start, if you in the chat might type in sort of what is your first word, your instinctive notion of what it is to be vulnerable. What is vulnerability? Just I don't want a sentence or a paragraph. I don't want, circles and arrows on the back of each one. I just want words. Okay, so let's just see what they are. Because I think that will help inform our conversation. Openness, truth, receptivity, scared, exposed, at risk, raw. Oh, I love that one. Truthful, fear, soft. Ooh, Jenny, that's interesting. I can't wait to hear more about that. Clarity, openness, a lot of openness, not in control. Awesome. Anything else? What did I miss? Off balance. That's interesting too. Receptive. I think we said that. Okay. Bare. Oh, I love that. Soft again. Emotionally available. Loss. Interesting. Relieved and anxious. So the answer is yes. that all of that and more is what vulnerability comes to offer us. And, every year Judaism builds into our life an opportunity to be vulnerable. We are not meant to be vulnerable all the time, right? But there's a particular time in the year that we are to be vulnerable. We are literally to strip down to our bare essence and to do the work of examining what comes underneath all those layers. And of course, we're talking about Elul, the month of Elul, leading into and including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the high holy days, the Yamim Noraim. And it's really one of the most important things that we have at our disposal, I think, because we have this chance to experience all those things that you just laid out, all those feelings, all those experiences, hopefully in service of something greater, even fear, right? Even that moment, I'm standing on the bima and Rolly asks me a question. I was terrified, right? And this is not even the most kind of vulnerable that I've ever experienced in my life. It's just, for the sake of the conversation. But that fear, that excitement, those butterflies, that sense of like, what if I mess up? What, right? Gives us a certain kind of power and confidence and courage, or at least has the potential to do so. And it is the same in that time frame every year. At the beginning of the year, we drill down super deeply into this place of vulnerability. And so I want to begin with a passage from the Tefillah, from the morning liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's in both selections because it sets us up for an understanding of what we are doing, what we're supposed to do, and how we might enter into a vulnerable state. So let me share my screen with you. And I think we put it in the chat. Did we not? The text in the chat? Oh, that's not what you need to see. Hold on. Let's see. You don't need my calendar. Here we go. Come on. You'd think 2 years in, I know what I'm doing here. Okay. Can you guys see this? I'm going to scroll up for you. Okay. So everybody can see this okay? Anybody not see this? Okay. So let's start with this very super straightforward comment in the morning liturgy. Ma anu, ma chayenu, ma chasdenu, ma tzidkotenu, ma yeshuatenu, ma kochenu, ma gevuratenu. We are asking, and this is not something we read out loud, right? This is something that we're sort of reading to ourselves. We're davening under our breath. Maybe we sing it out loud, maybe not. Perhaps this is the first time you've seen this. What are we? What is our life? What is our piety? Or we could say, what is our, it's not really our piety. What is our compassion? Really, what is our chesed? What is our righteousness? What is our attainment, our power, our might? This is the essence of the question that we come to the Yamim Noraim with. We're asking, who are we? What are we? What's our purpose? And to ask such questions, I think, brings up the potential for all those feelings that you labeled in front, right? It could make us feel super open. It could make us feel afraid. It could make us feel scared. It could make us feel soft, right? Penetrable. Just a sort of a little moment. How many of you are seeing this I'm going to stop sharing so I can see. How many of you are seeing this text for the very first time? Ever hear about this text, never seen it? And okay, so we have a few. Okay. And what do those questions evoke for you? I'm just curious, like off the top of your head, just you can raise your hand or unmute just to sort of get us hear a few more voices. What do those questions, especially for those of you who have never seen them before, what do they evoke for you?
Reflection.
Reflection, yeah. Anything else?
Potentiality.
Potentiality. Oh, I like that word. Anything else?
To go inside.
To go inside, right? To look at ourselves. Humility, I see. Thank you. To go inside and ask ourselves, right? Who are we? Ma anu.
Introspection.
Introspection. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you.
Self-assessment.
Sorry, say again.
Self-assessment.
Self-assessment. So the most, in my opinion, the most compelling kind of vulnerability is the vulnerability that we have when we look in the mirror. When it's just our eyes seeing ourselves. Because there's all the voices of judgment and, oh, are there new wrinkles, new gray hair? Oh my gosh, I've gained weight, I've lost weight. Oh, who am I? I don't look the same, right? All of you, as I said, you all look exactly the same as you did 20 blah, blah, blah years ago. But there's a certain sense of uncertainty when we do that. And we do it every single day. We subject ourselves to that moment of introspection, of vulnerability every time we look at ourselves in the mirror. And every time we open our mouths and every time we do something and we talk to someone. So that state of vulnerability is very heightened sometimes, all the time. And yes, Susan, you have a question.
No, I was just going to comment that I think it also, at least for me, brings a sense of a relationality, that I'm not alone, that it's not alone. Like, especially, first of all, we're saying it, it's all in the plural.
Yeah.
So it's like us in community, it's not just me.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of makochenu, like what gives us strength, not just like what is my own, but what gives us, what is there in the world that allows this to happen? So like the questions open up bigger.
I love that. I love that. I mean, so much of our High Holy Day liturgy, right, is in the plural because we're not alone, because the whole process of introspection is not one that we take on by ourselves and only by ourselves, right? All of the al-chet shechatanu, there's no sense that this is just about my faults, right? It's not my vulnerability alone. It's all of ours. And that's a very powerful idea. So let's bring us to the place of where the psalmist reaches. And the book of Psalms of all of the books in the biblical canon, it's the only one that's written in the first person. And from, Psalm 1 through 150, you can experience and you can connect with all of the various feelings that you experience in your life, right? Joy and praise and hardship, beseeching, difficulty, they're all there. Every single one of those emotions is there. And so one of the Psalms to me that really takes us on a complete journey, basically through everything, is a Psalm that I know is well known to, if not all of you, then most of you, Psalm 23. And this is the Psalm both of vulnerability and power. So I want to share this with you, and we're going to look at it together. So here we go. Would someone like to read this in the English? Since I can't see you all, I'm just going to invite you to unmute. And if you are more than one, somebody will take a break. You'll read later. So someone read this, please.
A Psalm of David. The Eternal is my shepherd. I shall never be in need. Amid the choicest grasses does God set me down. God leads me by the calmest waters and restores my soul. God takes along paths of righteousness in keeping with the honor of God's name.
Okay, stop there for 1 second. Tell me, either you can tell me or anyone can tell me, what's the image that you get from these first 3 verses? What's the feeling? What's the image? What do you experience in the first 3 verses?
Being taken care of.
Being taken care of, right? God is my shepherd, right? The nature of a shepherd, right, is to care for the flock, right? So to make sure everything is in order, right? Okay, good. What else?
I
You're not
feel
alone.
safe.
You're not alone. God is with you.
God is with me, right? God leads me by calm waters, okay?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind. It's very pastoral, no? Like the scene, right? Green, choicest grasses, bino desha yarbitseni, right? In the most lovely of grasses, almei menuchot yinahaleni, right? By the calmest of waters. It's all really a nice feeling, right? Any other last thoughts on those first three verses?
It's like the most beautiful, perfect, clear blue sky with a couple of fluffy white cloud days.
Yeah, great. It's just like, it's the most breathtaking, pastoral view of the world. Okay, keep reading, who is ever reading for verse 4.
Even should I wander in a valley of the darkest shadows, I will fear no evil. You are with me, God. Your power and your support, they comfort me.
Okay, so we have a slight change of scenery now. Okay, those white fluffy clouds, what's happening now?
Underground darkness.
It's like, I know you're not going to believe this, but in San Diego today, it's actually like a little rainy and it's a little cold, and there's the clouds in the sky. This is not normal for us. We don't know. I say we because after 12 years, I am a we, but like they don't know how to drive in the rain. Sorry. But anyway, but there's a little bit of a cloud cover, right? This pastoral view. Even though I wander in a valley of the darkest shadows. So I want to look at the Hebrew for a second. Gam, it's bolded there on the right side. Gam ki elech. The word elech means to walk, right? Or wander, but it's walking. Gam ki elech beget salmavet. Even though I wander in a valley of death or the darkest of shadows, I will not be afraid. Lo irara. Ki ata imadi. If you've ever read Rabbi Harold Kushner's book on Psalm 23, you will recognize this interpretation. I heard him speak and give this this understanding of this verse, I don't know, at least 20 years ago. And this is the most important verse of this psalm as it relates to vulnerability. Because what he says is this: it's not a mistake that the psalmist says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, or however you interpret that, however you explain it. He says, the psalmist doesn't say, yea, though I get stuck. Yea, though I can't move. Yea, though I can never get out of the valley. I walk through the valley of the darkest shadows. Meaning what? About the nature of those dark shadows and the place of vulnerability in that valley.
You'll get through
Doesn't
it.
stop me.
Get through it.
I make it through.
You're going to make it through it. Exactly. That the dark shadows and that valley, which is like right between the peaks, that's not a place necessarily that you will not get out of. But it also is not a place that you can avoid. And so that feeling of vulnerability is one that, in the words of the psalmist, like, Gam ki elech, the text says, even, like, it's a question almost, right? Gam ki elech, if I walk, which is to say, it's likely I'm going to live my life, and it is likely I will come to a valley of dark shadows. How will I manage? Gam ki elech, I will walk through. And not just that, lo irara. I'm not going to fear the negativity. I'm going to try not to be afraid. Ki ata imadi. Because, as we talked about in terms of the high holy days, right? Because I'm not alone. You, proverbially, you God, you community, you source of life in the universe, you're with me. I'm not by myself. And by the way, you, this is also Kushner's interpretation, you are not on the side of the dark shadow, right? You're not making it so the dark shadow is going to persist. You're with me. So my vulnerability, my delicate walk through a valley of dark shadows is not one without support. They comfort me. And then the psalm continues, right, with how that looks, right? You set a table for me in the presence of my enemies, right? There's a whole setup here of how I'm supposed to get through this. You anoint my head with oil. You make me feel special. My cup, kosi revaya. If you have ever experienced a difficult time and come through it, whatever it is, illness, loss, depression, divorce, anger with your kids, I mean, whatever it is, coming out of it can be a place where there's overflow, right? Kosi revaya, my cup, my life, it's overflowing because however long I've been vulnerable, now there is some revaya. There's some overflow of goodness. And the psalm ends, ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni. Kol yemei chayai, let there be goodness and loving kindness that would pursue me all the days of my life. Because however pastoral sometimes life seems to be, we know that there's going to be some dark shadow. And just like the peak to the valley to the peak, we pray that there'll be chesed and that there'll be tov, tuv, right? There'll be goodness and there'll be compassion on the other side. Le'orech yamin, right? For a length of days. So when we read this psalm, what do we come away understanding is the essence of this image of vulnerability? I'm going to look at you so you can, I'll stop sharing. And any thoughts of this psalm that you've perhaps not read it this way before or seen it this way before?
Well, you come through. There are challenges, but you come through.
You come through, yeah. Yes, Terry.
So I think it's interesting that it starts with the goodness of nature, which is in the world. And yet often when we're vulnerable, we feel alone and not in the world, but in our room, in our thoughts, in our head, in our wherever. And when you're reading this, it's really that the act of vulnerability is not only by ourselves, but when we put ourselves in the world, we'll walk through it and God will be with us and we'll come out into goodness on the other side, but it's in the world, not by ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, and it just made me think of something when you said that, Terry, that the Gates Almavet is not our home. It's the world, right? Mm-hmm. I think about this now, in the moments California is about to lift a mask mandate, right? Next week or this week. And we're all like, what does that mean? Like, can I leave my house without a mask? Should I? What does that mean? The Gates Almavet is not inside my house, but I perceive it to be just outside my door. So do I stay home? Do I continue to, protect myself? If I'm vaxxed and I'm boosted and I like all those things, like, can I go out? Can I be in community? Can I risk being vulnerable? And what degree of vulnerability is that? So the Gates Almavet is not where we live. It's where we go in some way. Yes, Harry.
There seems to be a verbal double whammy built in there. We started with the image of pastoral, which is an idyllic place in the country, but the Latin origin of the word shepherd is pastor. And we're getting it from two sides.
Yeah, very nice. Great. Any other comments on Psalm 23? Okay. So now we're going to take a journey back in time. Well, actually, no, sorry. Before we get to the journey, one other thing from the prayer. Oh, wait, hold on, chat. Let me just take a quick look and see if there's anything I need to look at. Yeah, I like that, Shira. Thank you so much. When I sense something potentially challenging arising, I continue to feel secure and comforted because of your loving care. That's like, okay, I'm gonna go out into the world and I will feel as protected as I can by all the ways in which I try to protect myself from the challenges that the world presents. Okay, so let's get down to basics one more time. Let me just bring you up to a screen share. Okay, every single morning, not just the High Holy Days, every single morning in our Shachrit service and Psuke de Zimra and getting ready to daven fully, we have this preparatory prayer. Somebody want to read this prayer from the weekday Shachrit, the Asher Yatzar prayer? Go ahead. Anybody?
Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, eternal, who heals all flesh, working wondrously.
Okay, so I'm shifting here for a moment just to like remind us that vulnerability isn't just the emotional vulnerability, right? There's also a physical vulnerability, and that our tradition understands that the body itself is a vulnerable vessel. It is not impermeable. It is not, it's not immutable. Right? There are things that can happen to our bodies, and every day, this is actually the blessing that is traditionally said actually after you use the restroom, otherwise known affectionately as the bathroom blessing when I was growing up, that this sense that it's well known before your throne of glory that, you know, the body has many pathways and openings, and if one of them is opened when it should be closed or closed when it should be open, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Knowing that the body is vulnerable without us thinking or doing or saying anything does what to our sense of being in the world? Is it a comfort? Is it a concern? How, and especially, I mean, we've been very focused on the vulnerability of the body for the last 2.5 years. So how does this fall on your ears in the context of spiritual vulnerability and physical vulnerability? Anyone?
Humbling.
Humbling, right? You are not in control of everything. We are not. I am not. Right? Certainly not when our bodies are unable to function at 100%, which, you know, for many of us is often, right? Chronic illness, difficulty in the body that is with us for a long time, right? Or the sudden onset of something that renders us vulnerable in our own being. I will tell you, let me stop sharing so I can see you when I tell you this. So about a month ago, after 2.5 years, I got COVID. I'm vaxxed, I'm boosted. I'm like, I don't hang out with anybody who's not vaccinated. I'm not in big crowds, whatever, but somehow I got sick. And all the fear that I had been like holding on to for 2 years about what it would be like when it happened, you know, was very much front and center. And at first I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally fine. Totally fine. And then 24 hours in, I felt like I had strep throat, bronchitis, and mononucleosis all at once.
I gotta read something to you.
And so in that moment, suddenly I was like, oh, right, I actually am vulnerable to this. which I probably thought most of the last 2 years, like, nah, I'm not going to get it. I'm careful. I'm this, I'm that. What we've all said, probably many of us anyway. So that sense of the physical vulnerability that, again, is actually not in our control, even as much as the vulnerability to walk through a valley of the darkest shadows. And this is then a new kind of vulnerability, which is that no matter what we do, no matter who we are, no matter how long we live, we will confront uncertainty and risk and emotional exposure. And none of that means we are weak or not okay. As Brene Brown teaches, really one of the most foremost authorities on vulnerability as a researcher and as a storyteller, and we're going to read some of her texts later, she teaches that to be vulnerable is the most accurate measure of courage. I'm going to say that again. The most accurate measure of courage is to be vulnerable. You can decide whether that's physical vulnerability or spiritual or emotional or psychological vulnerability. But it is an act of courage in some way to be in that place. Because we don't know how long the valley of the darkest shadows is going to last. We don't know when the peak is coming next. We don't know when the open vessel is going to close again, or the closed vessel is going to open again. We don't know. And that's a new layer of understanding that what sometimes we need is simply an understanding that we have to identify some degree of courage. And it doesn't look the same for everyone. And it isn't, there's no like hierarchy of courage here. So I want to be really clear. This is about what you or I or any of us might need to get through that valley of the darkest shadows. What is that thing that is a support for us? And we're going to look at a text in a little bit about how we understand our support. Okay. Any comments or questions on this before we move to Moshe? What I think is he's the greatest example of vulnerability, I think, as a person in our Torah arc. Yes, Lois, did you want to say something? Oh, but you're muted. You're muted.
Yes. So I just wanted to say that I feel so grateful, and we all probably do too, that we are a part of, this is the Jewish journey. You know, it's not just about us. We have the sages, we have the stories, you know, and so that to me gives me the comfort that I need to know beyond courage, that it's really about, you know, where I am this moment and feeling desperate or dark or whatever. Tomorrow can be something else. And sometimes it doesn't go away so quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really, you know, devastating for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that, you know, we're not alone in this.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And we're going to see even more what our tradition has to offer us. What's in our spiritual toolkit when we are, in fact, in a vulnerable place? Nathan, is that, I think you have your hand up.
It's Nathana.
Oh, Nathana, so sorry.
That's okay. I think it's also when you were talking about getting COVID and you're feeling vulnerable, I think this whole COVID thing has really made me understand that it's not even whether we can get sick, but it's just the awareness of the vulnerability of others. So that, you know, when you said, do I take off my mask? Do I do this? Do that? Do that? It depends if you give a crap about other people.
Yes.
And Jews, by giving a crap about society and us being aware of the fact that babies are getting sick from this COVID and dying from this COVID, so it's not over.
For sure not.
And we have to remain people from Israel have 4 vaccines and they're still contracting COVID.
Right.
They're still not, even if they're not getting symptoms, they're staying home
For
so
sure.
that it doesn't spread to anyone else, because that's what this is about.
Right.
And until we realize that we have to protect the most vulnerable besides ourselves and care about other people, we'll just continue to be a really messed up society.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's go back and look at Moses for a few minutes. Okay, let me share my screen with you. So we're going to actually spend like a little bit of a good chunk of time on Moses as an example. We're not far from these stories. Like we just read them. We're just, we're just coming to almost at the end of Exodus. So these probably sound very, very familiar for lots of reasons, not just because they're recent, but of course they form the bedrock of our story of our people and lead us into the story of Pesach, of course. So let's get started with chapter 3 of Exodus. There's a lot to say about Moses as a character, prior to this moment. There's only 3 chapters that precede this, of course, but we know that as a person, he is deeply impacted by injustice, by vulnerability, right? The first times that we meet him, right? He breaks up an altercation between an Egyptian and an Israelite, and he kills the Egyptian. Right. And he breaks up an altercation between 2 Israelites because he senses that someone is vulnerable. And that's his instinct. And that's what we know about him already before any of this. So here comes now, he's a shepherd, by the way. Let's connect back to Psalm 23, right? Gam ki elech b'geitz, right? I'm like, God is my shepherd. Here's Moses, the shepherd of the flock. And he's tending the flock of his father-in-law, Yitro, in the wilderness. And he's just out there. He's just doing his thing. So would someone please read starting with verse 2 of Exodus 3?
Okay, I'll read.
Okay. Go ahead.
Was that Harriet who's going to read?
I don't know. I can't see all of you at once. So whoever said they were going to read, go ahead and read.
Said she was going to read.
Okay, Lois, go.
Oh, okay. Starting verse 2.
Yeah.
A messenger of Adonai appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at the marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When Adonai saw,
Go ahead.
When Adonai saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. And God said, Do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. And continued, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And Adonai continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their sufferings. I have come down. I'm mindful of their sufferings. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That I wanted to set the scene so that we understand that Moses is operating in a situation of communal vulnerability. Right? The whole oppression of the Israelites in Egypt reaches God's ears, as it were. Right? God notices that Moses sees this bush that's on fire, but not being consumed. God identifies God's self and says, look, we have a problem. I'm mindful of their sufferings. I am mindful of the people's vulnerability. I'm coming to rescue them. The cry has reached me. So come on now. You're the guy. I'm sending you. I'm sending you to go rescue the vulnerable people. We're going to read in a moment what his response is, but I want you to just think for a second, even if you know the response. Think about your own reaction. Someone says to you, hey, we have a big problem, and you are the one who's going to help us make this better. What is your reaction to that?
Not me.
Right. Not me. And why is that? Why do you have that feeling?
Might not be up to the job.
Might not be up to the job. And why do you have that feeling?
Vulnerable.
Harriet, go ahead.
Because you're afraid.
Because you're afraid. Yeah. You're unsure. It's risky. Right?
You don't think you could do it.
Right. Oi, Gewalt. Yes. Thank you, Martha. Definitely. I'm sure Moses says Gewalt. I'm sure he said it with his hand over his head. Right. But yes.
Fear of failure.
Say again.
Fear of failure.
Fear of failure. We're going to see all of this in a minute, but all of you can appreciate the position that Moses is in. God says, there's this terrible thing happening. All these people are vulnerable. They're all at risk. And you're the one I'm going to send. And even though Moses has had all this experience, so to speak, we only know of two circumstances, but we know that in two occasions, he acted instinctively to protect the vulnerable. His reaction in this moment is going to be a little different. Just a little. Let's look at that. 1 second, Nathania. I'm sorry. 1 second. I'm not speaking right. Let me get to this text. Let's look and see what Moses' reaction is. So we scroll down. Okay. Someone else read this one, please.
But Moses,
read, guys, the quicker we get through. Go ahead.
But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt?
Okay, stop there. Mi anochi. There's only one question that Moses wants to know. He doesn't want to know, how am I going to do that? Or where do I get the tools? Or, do I have a megaphone? He says, in a sense, the very same question of the High Holy Day liturgy, Ma'anu. Mi anochi. Who am I? Why would you choose me? Mi anochi ki elech el Paro. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites? Okay, keep going, Martha.
And God said, I will be with you. That shall be your sign that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your father's house has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is God's name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you.
Okay. Now, so the response from God to Moses saying, who am I, is the same, right? Gam ki elech b'geitz hamavet lo yirah ki ata imadi. You're with me, God, right? But God says it to Moses. I'm with you. And that's going to be your sign. That's going to be how you prove it to the people. Not that they're actually going to believe you, but we'll get to that, right? Moses is experiencing a degree of imposter syndrome like no other. He says, who am I? I'm not. And, we're going to hear later, or maybe I think it's here where he says, or maybe I didn't put this part where he says, look, I have a speech impediment. I'm not good at this job. By the way, no one in the text, this is a sidebar, but it's really important to the nature of vulnerability. Nobody in the text talks about Moses' speech impediment except Moses. Right? No one. It's Moses' own sense of himself. I'm vulnerable. I can't speak right. I don't know. It's possible that he had no idea that he sounded just fine. And in fact, we know that God is going to tell him that God's going to appoint Aaron. Aaron will be his spokesperson. Does Aaron ever act as the spokesperson? I mean, for real? No, he never acts as Moses' spokesperson. He acts on his own, as in this week, when the people say, make us a God. And he's like, all right, just give me your gold. And he takes the gold and he throws it in the fire and out comes this God, right? This calf. That's what Aaron explains. But Aaron never serves as a spokesperson for Moses. So Moses finds the voice that he says he doesn't have. And he finds it the way any number of us might find our voice out of a difficult time. He finds it. And the name of God here, not the Popeye version. But anybody want to take a crack at what Eheya Asher Eheya actually means? Because of course here it's not defined, it's not translated. What is Eheya Asher Eheya? I know you got some Hebrew scholars in this group.
I am who I am.
Okay. Not exactly grammatically correct. Somebody else want to take a chance? I mean, yes, you say. What? Say again?
I will be.
Yes.
I will be who
Oh, yeah.
I will be. Eheya, it's the verb of to be, but it is the future tense.
I will be who I
I
am.
will be what I will be. I will become what I will become. And the reason why this is such a powerful moment for Moses to hear that the name of God, that the power that makes for redemption, salvation, courage, all these things is all about becoming. It's about finding your place. God being with you in the darkest of shadows, when you don't believe in yourself, when you're the most vulnerable you can be, it's a process of becoming. And that's what God says to Moses. God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. You tell the people, and by telling the people, you become who you're supposed to become, and by virtue of that, you will free the people. Because God's with you. So a few verses later, Moses has another moment of deep vulnerability. That's not about his speech, and it's not even about who he is. It's now about how the people receive him. Okay, can somebody read chapter 4, verse 1?
Okay, I'll jump in.
Please.
But Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say, Adonai did not appear to you?
Okay, stop. Moses now says, he now projects, right? This is another level of vulnerability. It's not just about who he is. And it's not just about, whether he has comfort or whatever. He says, what if they don't believe me? Why wouldn't they believe him? What? I mean, that's not about the people, although it could be, yes, because in their vulnerability and in their slave mentality and in all the things that they've experienced, they may not believe that someone has finally come to save them or that they could be free. They won't listen to my voice. They won't be able to. And so God has an answer for this. Go ahead, keep reading.
Adonai said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he replied, "A rod."
Mate, right, a rod, yeah, keep going.
God said, "Cast it on the ground." He cast it on the ground, and it became a snake, and Moses recoiled from it. Then Adonai said to Moshe, "Put out your hand and grasp it by the tail." He put out his hand and seized it, and it became a rod in his hand, that they may believe that Adonai, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, did appear to you.
Okay, stop there. Let's take a minute on this. God does not make something appear out of nowhere for Moses to grasp. Moses already has a staff, a rod. God says, see that thing that you have there? Throw it on the ground. He throws it on the ground, it becomes a snake, and therein is the power. But the rod itself is what he is to attach himself to hold on to. That is his comfort. Grab your staff. So I ask you, just think for a moment, when you have been vulnerable, what is the rod that you reach for? What's your rod? You don't have to share it, but come bring if you want to, but bring it to your mind. Because again, Gam ki elech begeit salmavet lo yirara ki ata imadi. What's your ata imadi? What is that thing, that presence, that power, that rod, that what is it that's going to comfort you? What is it that's going to make you feel less vulnerable? What is it that's going to be your superpower? Because in effect, the rod is a superpower, right? I mean, he throws it down, it becomes a snake, he picks it up, it turns back. But the superpower, it's superpower with the lowercase s, right? Like it doesn't have to be divine. But what's your superpower when you're vulnerable? Penny, did you want to say something? I saw you raise it. Yes, please. But you're still muted, Penny.
Okay. That a superpower is something greater than yourself. And in some ways, and in some situations, it feels like you become this superpower. And when it's over, you say, oh my God, I did that. I can't believe it.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Nancy.
It reminds me of a baby with a security blanket that the child goes to for security in threatening or uncomfortable situations. And for me, I often turn to the fact that in the past, I have conquered A, B, C, D.
Right.
I've been through something challenging and I've somehow managed it. So it's recalling past success.
And you may not know in the moment of your vulnerability that you have a rod. Sometimes we need somebody to remind us of our rod, right? And here's God saying to Moses, hey, you see that rod? You have this thing. This is your power. Use this. So sometimes we need someone else to tell us that we have that rod to be able to take us out of our vulnerability. Sometimes after the fact, we look back and we go, how did I do that? How did I get through that? And then we can assess what our rod was. Beth, and then Shelley, I'll respond to your comment. Yes, Beth. You're muted though.
Yes,
okay.
I saw. I just muted myself. Yes, well, I was thinking that ideally my superpower would be my sense of God inside of me and feeling whether it's a certain sense of faith or strength, taking some strength from God. My reality is it's more that I would think my superpower is really the friends I have around me who I feel give me that added strength when I feel vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you. So Shelley asked, isn't this also about the vulnerable changing when they are in power? David became vengeful once he was no longer vulnerable. Moses demands that all the people in Midian be destroyed. Well, I think what you're pointing to, Shelley, is important in that the question is always, how does our vulnerability change our character? Is vulnerability something that drives us to be vengeful, bitter, oppressive to someone else? And that's the challenge of a vulnerable existence. If there is no one there to help someone in their vulnerability, is it possible that they would turn around and exact such, challenge or power against someone else? I don't know. The folks who are here from Dor Hadash know that I'm always bringing in movies into my conversation. So I did see, here we go, Beth, there you go. So I did see the latest SpiderMan over winter break, I think. And if you've seen the SpiderMan, you realize, and I don't want to do any spoilers here, but like the nature of someone who is evil or, not a good person or not a nice person, right? Do we know what caused them out of their own vulnerability that they became so bad? Which is not to excuse it, right? I'm not excusing that, but I'm saying to point to Shelley's point, which is really interesting. We were talking about vulnerability as if it's a superpower in the positive, but what happens when vulnerability goes to a place where there's ossification of power and you don't know what to do, and then you actually inflict on someone else? We might say that Pharaoh had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, right? And we can talk about how, he didn't know Joseph, and yes, we can say that he was not a nice man and he wanted to kill all the babies. All that's true. But what is his fatal flaw? What's Pharaoh's fatal flaw? Anybody want to?
The death of his son?
Nope. Fatal flaw internal to himself. Sorry, what? Harriet?
Believing he's all powerful.
He believed he was all powerful, but that still wasn't his fatal flaw.
Stubbornness.
Stubbornness. Yeah, stubbornness. And what's the image of the stubbornness? What did he do? He hardened his heart. Oh, they did? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah, thank you, Florence. He hardened his heart, his own heart. It's for another shiur that we'll talk about what God did to Pharaoh's heart also. But in this moment, he hardened his own heart, refusing to see the possibility that his reality could change.
But I would say,
yes, Susan,
underneath there's fear, because it started with the fear of being overtaken.
Yes, agreed. Okay. All right, let's move on a little bit. So I'm going to jump us to a little piece of Talmud, and I want to share that I learned this piece of Talmud from another Marshall Meyer Fellow, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt. I don't know how many down the row she went, but I'm sure you all remember her. And she's now one of the co-senior rabbis at Adas Israel in Washington, D.C. And not too long ago, she popped on Facebook Live and she taught this little sugya from the Talmud that I went and looked it up and studied it and thought to myself, this will follow beautifully with the story of the rod. So this is from Masechet Yevamot. So I want to scroll down. It's a very short story, but it packs a punch. So would somebody please read this little passage from Yevamot?
I'll read.
Please, go ahead.
It is taught in a Baraita. Rabbi Gamliel said, once I was traveling on a boat, and from a distance I saw a boat that shattered and sank. And I was grieved over the apparent death of the Torah scholar who was on board. And who was it? Rabbi Akiva. But when I disembarked onto dry land, he came and sat and deliberated before me about halakha. I said to him, my son, who brought you up from the water? He said to me, a plank from the boat came to me, and I bent my head before each and every wave that came toward me. The waves did not wash me off of the board, and I reached the shore.
Okay, so just for your information, the text that's bolded is the text directly translated from the Aramaic and the Hebrew, although this is mostly Hebrew. And then the italics and the non-bolded are sort of added in for understanding. So we've got this little text of Rabban Gamliel is, traveling on a boat, and he sees this boat that shattered, and he was so upset that he thought it was Rabbi Akiva's boat. And when he gets to shore, here's Akiva. So Akiva didn't die. And Akiva's talking to him about halakha, and he's debating with him, and he says, so Gamliel looks at him and says, like, I don't understand, how did you survive this shipwreck? How did you survive this moment of intense vulnerability, obviously in a boat that's sinking, shattering, you're in the ocean? How did you survive? And the Hebrew is like, this is the genius of the rabbis, because there's a wonderful word play. So if you look in the Hebrew, it's underlined here. He says, Amarli, daf shel sfina, nizdamen li v'chol gal v'gal sheba alai nianati lo roshi. Daf shel sfina. So why is this a play on words? Because the literal translation is a daf is like a plank. So a plank from the boat, right, passed him by, and he grabbed onto it, and literally, it carried him over the waves crashed over him, but he had this plank, this plank of the boat that buoyed him to the shore. But what is the other meaning of daf? Page. So a page meaning, the whole of rabbinic tradition, the whole of the Talmud, the whole of everything that's important to him. Daf shel sfina, my spiritual practice saved me. The storm came and I was vulnerable, but you can fill in the blank here. My faith, my spirituality, my sense of self, my determination, my courage. I found something to buoy me. And it carried me out of this moment of a storm, right? A broken, shattered vessel, and took me to the shore. Okay, I'll pause there. I saw Erwin. Did I see your hand up? Oh, yes. Hi. Hi, Ruth. How are you?
Good. I was thinking about the tree of life, if you will hold fast to it. And I never thought about the holding, but
Etz Chaim Hila Machazikim Ba, that sense of like holding it. What does it do for us when it comes alive? Right? Etz Chaim.
But when we hold fast on to it, hold fast to it. It's like the same thing. Like, he's drowning in the water and.
Yeah. And we sing that, right? We sing it every time we take out the scroll of our people and we put it back to say, like, this is in our spiritual tool chest too. These are the things we can grab onto in our vulnerability or in our challenges or whatever we have. Jenny, did I see your hand up?
Yes, I'm not quite sure what I want to say, except the plank from the boat can also be whatever it is about the disaster that we can actually use. Like,
yes.
Much as I hate to admit it, living alone during COVID, I've hated the isolation, but I have to admit that it's been having to be alone with myself has been good for me in some ways. I mean, I've understood a lot more about my life than I did 2 years ago. So in a way, that's a plank from a crashed boat.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes. Terry.
And then I was thinking
Oh,
about
sorry, go
Psalm
ahead.
22. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Because tears can also be like that. I mean, I was thinking about the story when David and Jonathan cry together, and it says until David exceeded, and we don't really know what that means, except when you cry until you can cry no more, that can bring peace. And so maybe that's what the psalm is about also.
Very nice. Thank you. Terry. Oh, where'd you go? I saw your hand up and then I saw
Okay,
you.
sorry. So
Oh,
when I
that's
think
okay.
about crisis or vulnerability, or that oftentimes we don't, like you said, you might not know what your rod is. Oftentimes we don't know what we found to carry us, but it's as if in that uncertainty of vulnerability, something or God or spirituality or energy or whatever found us to carry us. And afterward, we can look back and identify what we found that carried us.
Yeah.
So is it that we find it first or that something finds us? And I think that's always a push and pull of vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, think about Moses again for a second. He had the rod because like he's a shepherd, right? He had this thing all along. It's not that God gave him the rod. He had the rod. And so it wasn't until God said, see that thing you have? You can use it. So whether we tell ourselves or someone tells us, I think what you're saying, is really powerful, that we may assume we have nothing. And then suddenly when we look back, we say, wow, I really had something. I really used something.
When I was a child, I mean, I can remember this memory, and sometimes it's the memory that carries us through as well. I mean, vividly, my grandfather under a big tree out in the backyard smoking, and he would say, he smoked cigars, and he was a little typical Jewish old man from the old country, and he would say, you got to have a little faith. And sometimes it's that faith that carries us through. The faith found us until we can find and identify and put a name on it. And Brene Brown talks a lot about putting names on things and giving it identity.
And I mean, we haven't talked about faith yet. It's probably for another conversation, but the sense of how we get through something, whatever you call that sense, that propulsion, is very much in the keeping with this moment in the sugya where something propels him. He's got this daf and it's taking him to shore. And interestingly enough, on the same daf, use the same word, the same daf of Talmud, I didn't include it here, but there's just a little bit further down, there's another almost exact same story. But this time, Rabbi Meyer is in the shipwreck and Rabbi Akiva's in the ocean, and a riptide, came and carried him. And the question is, it's the same thing. When there is this riptide, right? When there's this wave of something that is taking you in the midst of a crisis, what buoys you? What's your staff? What's your rod? What's your buoy? Where is that? What is that tool that you have to carry you through this? You know what the rule is. If you've never been in Southern California, you probably haven't heard this, but if you have done any kind of body surfing, water sports, do you know what the rule is when there's a riptide?
It's funny, Yael, because I wrote that just a moment before you said it.
Oh yeah. So go ahead, Joan. Nice to see you. Say what
Good
the
to see you
rule is.
too.
Say what the rule is.
You don't fight the riptide. You let it carry you out where it's going to go until you get to a safe place, and then you could swim to where you need to.
Exactly. The fighting of the riptide, like the fighting of quicksand, that makes the vulnerability, that sort of sinks you further. And I think I'll speak for myself. When I perseverate around something that is challenging me, and I'm just like, anxiety drives it around and around and around, I'm not going anywhere. I'm likely to sink deeper into my feelings of sadness or depression or vulnerability, whatever that is, right? And if I stop fighting for a few minutes, there might be an opportunity to be carried and then come to safety. There's so many pieces to this. Susan, I'm mindful of the time and I want to get to Brene. So go ahead, Susan.
So hi, this is Jonathan.
Hi.
Hi, I'm listening. It's a wonderful teaching. I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to make a comment about the staff with Moses.
Yeah. Oh, but you muted yourself.
Sorry about
Sorry,
that.
I did that.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
I'm like Moses. I didn't want to speak. No, anyway. So Moses, if I heard correctly, had the staff and knew he had the staff. But what I thought was interesting in the story was the staff's put on the ground and turns into a snake. Moses didn't know that he had that, or that that was evident. And what I think it says to me is you could have one thing that you actually know, but there's a quality to that thing that you know that you may not know, that in some instances has a transformative effect on who you might become in relation to whatever that object is.
Beautiful. Thank you. You don't always know the power of what you may know what you have, but you may not know its power or its secondary or third or like subsequent powers that reside. And that's, yes, thank you. So let's look at Brene Brown, because to end this teaching without looking at her would be, Ashanda. Okay, so let's look. These are just two passages from her TED Talk, and also then from an interview that she did. So I'm going to take the privilege of the position, and I'm going to read Brene to you. This is what I have found: to let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen, to love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. And I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult to practice gratitude and joy in those moments of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and, instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful, because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we are enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says I'm enough, when we stop screaming and start listening, we are kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. Since I started with the High Holy Days, let me bring in the end of the holiday season with Sukkot for a moment. Because what is the name of Sukkot? The Hebrew name for Sukkot, not just Sukkot. What is the Zman of? Zman? Simchatenu, the season of our joy. Tell me, how can we be so joyful when we're sitting in a sukkah and it's raining and it's cold and it's temporary and it's vulnerable, and yet we are. We build this temporary hut. We subject ourselves to the elements. We say life is fragile. We read Kohelet, the most, fragile of all of the books, right? It's all fragility, right? We could say Hevel HaHevelim is fragility. It's all fragile. It's impermanent, in the words of Rami Shapiro. It's impermanent. And we do this at the moment of our joy. And I thought of that as soon as I read this piece of Brown's, because to be this vulnerable is to be alive. And to operate from that place, which is not to say we should be happy when we're sad, or happy when we're vulnerable, or happy when we're suffering. But to feel all those feelings means we're alive. And when we don't feel that sense of vulnerability, or we're sort of like flat in our emotion, it's really hard to find the rod. It's hard to find the daf. it's hard to walk through the valley of the shadow of the darkest evil. And so we have to sort of at least keep at arm's length a little bit of gratitude, a little bit of praise, a little bit of joy, so that we can remember that those tools exist in our box too. And then what she says here is almost it's the penultimate thing I want to say. Vulnerability, I think, when I ask people what is vulnerability, and the answers were things like sitting with my wife who has stage 3 breast cancer, trying to make plans for our children, the first date after my divorce, saying I love you first, asking for a raise, sending my child to school, being enthusiastic and supportive of him, and knowing how excited he is about orchestra tryouts and how much he wants to make first chair, and encouraging him and supporting him, and knowing that that's not going to happen. To me, vulnerability is courage. It's about the willingness to show up and be seen in our lives. And in those moments when we show up, I think those are the most powerful, meaning-making moments of our lives, even if they don't go well. I think they define who we are. And the Jewish version of this sentiment is found in this last teaching of Pirkei Avot. Uvimakom she'en anashim, ishtadel lihiyot ish. In a place where there are no people, in a place where humanity is lost, in a place of vulnerability, in a place where we can't find our footing, our rod, our staff, our daf. What can we do? Lihiyot ish. Be a person, a vulnerable body, be a person of integrity, of risk-taking, of breath and bone and sinew and blood and all those things that are imperfect and are not permanent forever. B'makom she'en anashim. That's the only rule. That's the only job we have, is to be that ish, which comes out of Adam, which comes out of Adama, which is the most rooted, grounded way we can be. We got 5 more minutes, right, Dave?
Sure.
Or maybe we don't.
You got it.
Last thoughts, words, comments before I throw it back to Cantor Mintz. Did I miss anything in the chat? Can you get a copy of these sources? Yes, Joyce. Can you put it into the chat for everyone? I think it was there at the beginning, but you can have it again.
There it is.
Wonderful. Yes, Bernie.
You've discussed the physical and emotional components of life of the human being. And as you were doing that, I was struck by the thought that this very complex organism that is us was created by one simple breath. And that impresses me, and then gives me the ability to make Hashem my plank in the middle of the ocean.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, Shira.
Well, that was hard to follow, Bernie. Sorry. I think something that occurred to me when we were back talking about Moses, to connect it all back, Moses and the bushes, when I'm come upon a challenge, if I can remember to pause, and look at that bush, to pause a second, then sometimes it comes, I realize, that the power that's in that rod, that I didn't know.
Yeah. Thank you. Bob Cantor asks, do we say Psalm 23 at a funeral or at a death because we are at our most vulnerable? I think so. I think that moment, both that we are at our most vulnerable and that there will come a movement on the other side. All of the laws of death and mourning in Judaism are not meant to keep us in our grief. We're not supposed to go to the cemetery every week, right? We are supposed to, after the year of mourning, right? We say Kaddish on the yard site and, and that's it. And at Yisker, we are meant to return to the land of the living. And so that's what that psalm embodies. It's the pastoral, it's the valley, and it's the return. I think there are more questions. I can't really tell in the chat. I see Bernie and Shira still have their hands up, but such lovely messages. Thank you so much. Any other last words before I bid you all farewell? And you all have an open invitation to come to Southern California and enjoy a little sunshine in San Diego. And I look forward to the next time that I can be back at BJ. My first spiritual home and where my heart resides. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yael, thank you so much for such a rich and deeply moving teaching tonight. Really, we're all holding so much more for it. Just to let everyone know that again, this is a weekly series over the course of 6 weeks. So join us again 1 week from tonight, where we'll be learning with Rabbi Eric Solomon, who will be leading us through an exploration of life and death in this time of COVID-19. Surely another really rich evening. So that's a week from tonight. Let me throw the link in the chat for those who may want to register for that. But otherwise, we'll wish everyone a Laila Tov. Have a good night, and once again, Rabbi Yael Ridberg, thank you so much.
A pleasure and a privilege. I thank you all very much for the invitation. Litraut.